Hello and a warm welcome to all those tuning in this evening to my YouTube station, Smita Sharma Journalist. And before we go ahead, a very happy Diwali to all of you. I'm sure you've had wonderful celebrations. Of course, the crackers continue to burst. And just a gentle reminder before we proceed that if you like the content here, then do press on the like button, the notification bell icon, in fact, in particular, so that you're aware whenever we go live with our content, and do share and subscribe to the station. Now, I know Diwali is over, but all eyes are right now on that big presidential elections in the United States of America. Who gets to be the next president of the world's superpower? You know, as these new geopolitical rivalries continue to shape up. And today we are going to talk about what could be the possible implications of these elections. 5th November is when America is voting. Of course, more than 50 million Americans have already voted in early voting as well. And, the candidates now, whether it's Donald Trump or Vice President Kamala Harris, they are essentially now focusing on shoring up all the support that they can in the battleground states, which are the key swing states. So I have a very special guest with me here today. Lisa Curtis is joining me from Washington, D.C. She is, of course, a senior fellow right now, a director of the Indo-Pacific Security Program at CNAS, which is DC-based, is the Center for National, in fact, Security. She's also a foreign policy, national security expert with decades of experience of having worked in Capitol Hill, State Department, CIA, in very senior roles, particularly, of course, in the Democrat regimes as well, administrations as well. Thank you so much, Lisa, for joining me here, and a good afternoon to you.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and happy Diwali to you.
Thank you so much. You know, I'm going to, of course, take your time up during this discussion to talk about the key foreign policy differences and agenda for the two candidates, whether it's former President Donald Trump or it's Vice President, Kamala Harris. But if I could just start by asking you, because the numbers are not looking like they're stacking up well for Kamala Harris at this point in time. There was an initial momentum. Is it really going to be back to an unpredictable Trump era?
Well, of course, we don't know whether it's going to be a Harris or Trump administration. The polling is very close. It's literally a dead heat, and it will be determined in those 6 or so battleground states. So we don't know what's going to happen. But if it is a Trump administration, I think there will be similarities to the last 4 years of Trump. But there, are obviously going to be differences as well. He'll have a different vice president. He, has learned a lot, being, president already for 4 years. He will have a better idea of what he wants to do, how he wants to do it, the people he wants to rely on, have as advisors. So I think, things will definitely start out differently than they started out last time. If you remember, in 2017, right after Trump took power the first time, there was a lot of chaos in terms of appointments. He went through, a couple different national security advisors early on, a lot of turnover. I don't think we'll see that kind of chaos this time around. I think, he's learned a lot about staffing up, getting the right people into place. In terms of policies, I think this is going to be very interesting. I think the Asia-China policy will be a continuation of what Trump started in the last, year and a half of his first term, which has been, carried on by the Biden administration. So I think that will largely continue, be largely consistent, be what it's been, over the last 5-6 years. But, we may see changes in Europe with Russia-Ukraine issue. I think, he's definitely been clear that he would pursue a different strategy there. So
Lisa, we're going to go into some of these key areas, which I'm sure all the audiences are interested in, and the viewers who are tuning in, feel free to drop in your questions into the chat box there for Lisa Curtis. But just a quick question before I go area by area, subject by subject. I'm told by senior US officials that the feeling in State Department right now is that the results are likely going to be contested, that perhaps the results may not get declared for the next couple of days after, 5th November voting as well. So there are going to be two transition teams in place. Can you just give us a behind the scene sort of a preparation of what goes into during this presidential election mode of how State Department really prepares for transitions?
Well, so each of the Harris and Trump teams, should have a transition team where the Trump team, both teams would be given access to the major government departments. They would have, at least one person sitting in these departments, being briefed about policies and procedures, and then thinking about, who might fill the 4,000 political appointee slots that will be available to whoever wins. This is part of the U.S. process, the spoils process, that the president gets to determine, 4,000 different slots throughout the government, everything from special assistants to cabinet secretaries. So, these people are already making, putting together lists of people, and they're thinking about, how they might restructure some of these agencies, things they might do differently. So all this is happening now as we speak, as they prepare, and each side sort of assumes they're going to win and makes those assumptions. So this is happening, and it really depends on the team itself, how much they want to be briefed by the outgoing administration. Once the election happens,
Right.
there'll be turnover briefings. I know when I was at the National Security Council, we definitely briefed the incoming team, in December, before they took power in January, before the Biden team took power in January. I think, things were a bit different at the Department of Defense, frankly, given the personnel there. So it really depends on the leadership at each of the agencies and how willing, they are to cooperate with the other team, so to speak. And there've been different transitions at different times. They talk about the transition from Bush to Obama being very good. If you remember, this was 2008, and you had the Mumbai attacks in India during our transition it was our Thanksgiving holiday, the 26/11 attacks. So that was a very fraught time. But I think, each team, the Bush team and the incoming Obama team did a good job of coordinating and dealing with that horrible crisis that India was going through at the time.
Right. That's a very, in fact, interesting backdrop that you provided to this question, that must be on everybody's mind. But now coming to the key areas of foreign policy, I understand that, of course, in these presidential elections, the dominant topics have been more on the domestic front. They have been about whether it's the economy, immigration, or, of course, abortion, women's rights. But coming to foreign policy, top of everybody's mind, how will the US-Russia relationship reset or happen under a Trump presidency versus a Harris presidency? Donald Trump has been saying, of course, that he will make sure that the wars come to an end. And the sense globally is that the Ukraine war can only stop once the US really wants it to stop, because it's not necessarily the Ukrainian war that we are looking at. So your take on this?
Well, the Ukrainians have been fighting very valiantly, protecting their country. They were invaded, unjustified, illegal invasion of their country. They've been, putting up a good fight. The U.S. has been supporting them, with military assistance and aid. The Europeans, UK, have also been supporting them. But Trump has definitely signaled that he would put more of a focus on, trying to end the war, maybe trying to facilitate some kind of peace agreement. But it's really unclear what that would look like, because Russia has illegally taken Ukrainian territory. What's going to happen in terms of territory that was taken post 2022 from Ukraine, and what's going to happen in terms of ensuring this kind of invasion never happens again. I think to ensure that, there would have to be security guarantees given to the Ukrainians, and that would probably be in the form of some kind of NATO membership, which is exactly what Russia wanted to avoid in the first place. But this is, unfortunately, this is going to be, I think, a result of its, its ill decision making on this front. So I think, you know, but even if Harris is elected, I think there is a desire to see the war end, of course. But there also is a desire to make sure it never happens again and to not encourage other countries to take the same path as Russia. I think that's the problem. If we sort of say, oh, well, Russia did this and, all is fine, then it's just going to happen again. And other countries are going to do the same thing, and we'll have no sense of rules-based global order. So that's the challenge.
But, there is a sense among experts here in India, the strategic community, that if Trump comes to power, perhaps there will be, and if he does manage to bring that war to an end, there will be a lesser pressure on India vis-a-vis its ties with Russia, compared to, say, for instance, a Harris administration that will see more of the same of the Biden policy continue. And given that, I'm talking to you in the backdrop of recent US sanctions against 19 Indian entities and individuals, for allegedly supplying dual-use technology to Russia, of it being a violation, that the Ministry of External Affairs today has reacted and said that it's not a violation at all. So do you see relations, the India-Russia sort of balancing, the India-US balancing, being different under a Trump versus a Harris presidency?
I think that a Trump administration would still want to ensure, sanctions policy is being followed, that that countries aren't violating sanctions that are in place. So I don't see any less focus on wanting to penalize those companies that are violating international sanctions. I don't think that's going to happen. And I think that we'll have to see what happens with Trump's policy toward Russia. But I should remind you that there are a lot of Republican leaders who are very supportive of the Ukrainians. A major aid bill for the Ukrainians passed. Mike Johnson, the leader of the House of Representatives, Speaker of the House, supported that in the end. So there's still a lot of support for the Ukrainians, and this is all going to have to be factored in. Yes, there likely is going to be more focus from a Trump administration in trying to end the war, and that will proceed. But I don't think that means there's going to be any major changes or pressure lifted on any countries that might have companies that are violating the sanctions or helping Russia in the war. I don't think that's going to change.
But, given Trump's stance on NATO itself, he made a lot of harsh statements during his last, in fact, when he was president. There could be that very serious sort of a chance of the US pulling out of NATO itself.
Well, NATO has really showed why it's there and how strong it is post the February 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think, Russia expected that NATO would not hold together, that there would not be the cohesiveness that there has been among the Europeans with the United States. So I would say that NATO's stronger now than it was pre-2022. And also, let's not forget, you have the Indo-Pacific Four, who now have attended 3 NATO meetings, and this is Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. So what this shows is there is an increasing connection between Europe and NATO and what's happening in the Indo-Pacific region, which of course affects India's interests as well. And I think, most of the Europeans recognize that they were taken off guard by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They don't want to be taken off guard by China doing something aggressive, for instance, invading Taiwan. So I think everyone's now making this connection between what happens in Europe and vis-a-vis Russia is going to have a direct impact on what China does in the Indo-Pacific. And China and Russia relations are becoming closer and closer. Now we see Russia becoming closer with North Korea, even North Korean troops going to Russia, probably going to fight in Ukraine. So this is all very dangerous. And I think that an incoming Trump administration couldn't ignore these new linkages we see between Russia and China, now with North Korea, Iran. And there's going to have to be a policy that deals with these new realities. It's not the same world that it was even 4 or 5 years ago. And I think a new Trump administration would take that into account.
But having said that, on the issue of China itself, when it comes to, it's been for a while now that it's not back to business with China, really, between the US and, Beijing. Do you see, in terms of the trade policy, in terms of the approach to China, something significantly different, which is on the manifestos, on the agenda of either the Democrats or the Republicans, or it sounds the same for both the camps?
Well, as I was saying earlier, I think you're going to see more continuity than change when it comes to either a Trump or Harris administration, how they deal with China and the Indo-Pacific. Remember, it was during the Trump administration that there was the export controls on Huawei and ZTE on the telecommunication, the 5G front. So the Trump administration started this. The Trump administration also revived the Quad in 2017. But these same policies have now been carried forward, and they've been built upon by the Biden administration. You see, the Quad has now elevated to the summit level. There's regular summit meetings. You see that the Biden administration has put more export controls on advanced semiconductor technology going into China. We now have outbound investment restrictions on U.S. investment in China. So there's been a continuation, a strengthening of restrictions and a de-risking. People aren't saying decoupling as much, but in a way it is a decoupling that the U.S. is doing with China on the economic and technology front. That will all continue if Trump is elected. I think the major difference may be that we'll see even more tariffs from a Trump administration. Trump has said he's going to, slap 60% tariffs on Chinese goods coming in. There's been a lot of debate on what that would do to the U.S. economy.
That could also be problematic on the India front too, because, that would apply the higher tariffs to the Indian products as well, and also asking India to open up the trade valves further.
Yes, I think that would add complications to the U.S.-India trade relationship as well. And again, we're speculating here. We don't know, what a Trump administration would do. We're just going by some of the things that he has said on the campaign trail. But we know that sometimes you say things on the campaign trail that you don't always stick to. And so, we'll have to see what happens. But I think if there are, more tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the United States, this is going to have an impact on the overall U.S.-China relationship, which inevitably would affect India as well.
There's an interesting comment in the chat box from Meera, who says that while she understands that Trump can be an Islamophobe, he hates immigrants and so-called anti-feminist, but according to her, he still seems to have a little bit more humanity left in him compared to other. And she puts a disclaimer that she doesn't support either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. But I think the criticism has been mounting against the Biden administration, in particular, over its handling of the West Asian crisis, of the war in the Middle East, in particular because the US has been talking about an international law and order situation, global rules and regulations when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war. But the lens is very different when it comes to Israel's aggression in the region, whether it be, of course, what it's doing against Palestinians in Gaza, what it's doing in Lebanon, to other countries. So do you think there's a scope for Kamala Harris to have a different approach to the issue?
Well, I think we need to go back to October 7th, 2023, when this started, which was the terrorist attacks in Israel that killed, 1,200 Israelis. That is what has led to the current conflict that we see in the Middle East.
I mean, there's a whole bunch of arguments there that that was a trigger, but that was not really the start. You've had these conflicts continuing for decades now, and you've had Israeli aggression for years now. It's not necessarily seen only in the context of, which of course was a barbaric terrorist attack. And I don't mean to, of course, not condemn it in any other way. It was a barbaric terror attack, but there are roots to it and there are reasons to it.
Well, yeah, India and the US have both been subject to terrorist attacks in the past. So I think, we fully understand what it means to experience these horrific terrorist attacks. And I think that is the trigger for the current conflict that we see. But, obviously there has been the, Arab-Israeli dispute happening for a long, long time. But in terms of differences between whether it's Harris or Trump, I think there won't again be major differences. I think a Trump administration would support, Israel. I don't see, a Trump administration cutting any military support to Israel. And I think, Trump has also expressed an interest in trying to help end this conflict as well. So, we'd have to see what ideas he brings. But I would just point out that if you remember at the end of the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, he was responsible for ushering in the Abraham
Abraham
Accords.
Accords, yeah.
Were very important agreements, and which were continued by the Biden administration. So he does have influence in this region, and I think, he would try to apply that to bring, some kind of, peaceful end to this sort of current phase, horrific phase of the conflict there.
I mean, because he pulled out the troops from Afghanistan, a promise that he had made during the campaign, election campaign, of course, the last time around that he had won. And he has chosen to constantly focus on making sure that it's the economy that remains a constant narrative. That's where he seems to be point scoring. So really, do you think that for people there who are tired of inflation, rising costs, post a pandemic, that perhaps they are looking at, even if Trump is unpredictable, that unpredictability will help rein in wars in some sort of a way?
Yeah, I think that so it's a very complex political landscape right here in the United States right now. And there are, different reasons for people supporting different candidates. With the Trump campaign, I think what we do see is people, who support him do believe that he will be able to sort of calm the international situation, that, we're facing a particularly fraught global situation right now with, wars in the Middle East and Ukraine raging, with the China challenge and concerns about what happens there. And I think that they believe that Trump would be able to somehow calm the international situation and focus more attention on, the U.S. economy and building up the U.S. Economy and infrastructure. I do think that's probably what most of his supporters think.
Okay, I'm just going to take one quick question from the chat box before I ask you a last question. I know you have to go for another meeting. Somebody called Suas is asking, has there been any significant flips in favor of Democrats in any previous elections this close to the main election day? I know it's a kind of a political question. Does it come to your memory where it's been a neck and neck race? Because we've had 2016 when the popular votes, of course, went in for Hillary Clinton, but the electoral colleges have traditionally favored the Republicans.
Yeah, well, I think the Democrats, have really been trying to capitalize on some of Trump's, unconventional statements. He speaks from the hip. He has said some controversial things. And so the Democrats they're continuing up to now to try to capitalize on that, to try to, get more votes, bring more voters, trying to paint him as, unpredictable and somebody who's going to be out for revenge as soon as he comes back to power. So they are certainly trying to use that up to the last minute. But I think the the questioner asked about whether Democrats would switch. Was that the question? Whether Democrats
No,
might
have
switch
there been any
quickly
significant flips in favor of Democrats,
in
where it's been a
favor?
close race? Yeah.
So we haven't seen any major flips, I think, in the last couple of weeks. I don't know. Some people, say that the young people will get out the vote on the day of the election and, come out and vote in droves. I think that's really what it's about now. It's about
Mm.
both sides trying to get people to the polls. But, even then, it's not clear if getting those people that, may be lazy or don't normally get out and vote, if getting them to vote, whether that translates to a Democrat or Republican vote, is just so uncertain right now. Our country is very divided, and it's hard to tell even what those voters who usually don't vote, if they were to come out and vote, who they would vote for.
As in India, because we, of course, have the constant cycle of elections, as we say that every election boils down to that last booth management of getting your voters out there to vote. These are just two last quick questions. One, when it comes to the approach on South Asia, we have seen some significant differences emerge in the past couple of months, particularly over countries, be it Bangladesh or, Sri Lanka with the United States of America. The President Biden and his hugging of Muhammad Yunus didn't go down well with Indian sort of the political, strategic community here following Sheikh Hasina's ouster from Bangladesh. Do you think in South Asia you see more differences emerging, whether it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump who comes into White House?
Well, a country like Bangladesh doesn't really rise up to the priorities of the U.S. government. So it's really hard to tell, how much time would be spent focusing on Bangladesh. Now, I do think that Bangladesh is very unstable right now, and you see some worrying signs. The release of some Islamists from jail who committed crimes. Um, and so I think that, it could become a situation that there is no choice. The US government has to focus more attention on it because there are problems brewing there that could spill over, could lead to, international terrorism, or just, chaos in a very, um, unstable, very large country right on India's periphery. But I think right now that probably Bangladesh has not factored into
Hmm.
the Trump team's thinking on foreign
No,
policy.
because why I brought it up was on the occasion of Diwali, President Trump did make a statement talking about, Bangladeshi, the Hindu minority community getting attacked, coming under attack in Bangladesh, a statement that has not come so far, a condemnation from the Harris camp or from the Biden administration. And of course, this Trump statement has gone down well with the political ruling regime of the BJP here in India. So, I mean, in South Asia, do you think that the new government will have to have more dialogue with New Delhi?
The new Trump administration, if Trump is
Whichever
elected,
administration comes in,
whichever.
that in South Asia will need a little bit more attention when it comes to India-US relations.
So there should be a very strong dialogue between the U.S. and India on Bangladesh. I believe that there should be concern about what's happening there, and there should be a dialogue so that both sides understand each other's perspective and can, help ensure that the sort of next phase in Bangladesh, we're in a new era, a new political era in Bangladesh. We need to ensure that it remains stable, that Islamists do not gain more power or influence, and we don't see, more terrorism coming out of that country. Things like the bakery attack, almost 10 years ago now, that happened. But there was a very worrying phase in Bangladesh where ISIS and other terrorists were committing acts of terrorism. So we certainly don't want to go back to that period in Bangladesh. And Sheikh Hasina, yeah, she had stifled democracy, stifled the opposition, but she had acted strongly against terrorism. And
Hmm.
so that's something that we need to see continue, whatever new government emerges in Bangladesh. We need to see it, fighting terrorist forces fighting Islamist forces. So I do think it's important for the U.S. and India to work together to, figure out, how Bangladesh remains a stable democracy, nonviolent, and that they make it through this transition in a way that contributes to peace in South Asia, doesn't disrupt that peace.
Thank you. And just one quick last question, Lisa. In terms of the bench strength right now, whether it's the Harris administration, if that comes into power, or whether it's Donald Trump. I mean, in Trump in particular, he may be a man who is very difficult to read, but do you see that his team would have matured over the last couple of years, that you'll perhaps have more stable hands at work when it comes to economy, immigration that could again impact India and Indians, or foreign policy at large?
I think so. Again, there's 4 years of experience of the Trump administration. There are a lot of people, who would be interested in working in a Trump administration. A lot of good, talented, smart people. So I don't buy into this idea that some of the Democrats are saying that it will only be super loyalists and people without a lot of experience or professional background. I don't buy that. I think there's plenty of talent, and they are interested in going in, were Trump to be elected.
Okay, we will leave it there. Of course, 5th November is that big day. We don't know if we will have a clear result out by 6th November, early morning India time, or there will be a few days of wait and speculation. Let's just hope that situation does not turn into similar to what we saw, that violent 6th January attack on Capitol Hill. That's something that has tarnished American image all over the world. But thank you so much, Lisa Curtis, for finding time this afternoon and joining us from Washington, D.C.
Thank you for having me.
Always respect your insights. And I do hope that, of course, we get to see you back in the administration playing some active role in the days to come as well.
Thank you, Smita. It's good to see you.
Lovely. And thanks to all our viewers who joined in as well into this transmission.